Good evening, everyone. You know, when I write emails to different synagogues and mosques and churches across the U.S. to try and arrange gigs here in the U.S. for myself and Ali, I always recommend to them that if you're a synagogue, why don't you have an event inviting a mosque to join you? If you're a church, why don't you have an event inviting a synagogue to join you? Multi-faith events bringing people together, because that's what Ali and I are about. In this particular venue, I don't have to ask that you bring people from other faiths to hear us speak, because that's what this place is about. And I really feel that this is really the place that's going to resonate with our message, and I'm already resonating with who you are. So, Craig, wherever you are, thank you for what you've created here, and thank you for having us, and thank you to everyone. According to all the odds, Ali and I should not be here together. It's a miracle that we know each other. It's a miracle that we're friends and colleagues. It's a miracle that we're building an organization together. Because geographically, we're neighbors. We live literally right next door to each other. But where we come from, Palestinians and Israelis, Ali's a Palestinian, I'm an Israeli, Palestinians and Israelis don't see each other. The one is, at least to me, to an Israeli, Palestinians are invisible. It's as if they don't exist. They're not part of our consciousness. And for me, it's a miracle that a year and a half ago, a bit less than that, I got to know Ali, and today we're friends and colleagues working together. So I'm going to introduce myself. I like to say that I'm a Jew and a rabbi, I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. What do I mean by those terms? When I say I'm a Jew, well, you have to know that to be a Jew is not just to be a member of a faith community. Judaism is not a religion, or just not merely a religion. The Jews are a people. It's a family that grew, became an extended family, a clan, and then a people, and then a nation. And the Jewish nation, that's what we are, from the very beginning, from our very creation, has been a nation centered in the land of Israel, the one that's pictured there on the map. From the book of Genesis, when Abraham was chosen to be a first Jew, he was told by God, I will give you that land, and you will become a great nation in that land. And throughout Jewish history, we've had 2 Jewish commonwealths. Now we're on the 3rd. I'll talk about that later. Throughout Jewish history, we've been a nation centered in a land. I want to say one other thing about being a Jew, which is that my consciousness of who I am, my identity, is not Hanan Schlesinger, born 58 years ago and dying tomorrow or another 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years. My consciousness is Hanan Yisrael, Jew, and I was born 3,000 years ago. When Abraham, the prophet, when Abraham, our forefather, walked in the land of Israel, that's when I was born. And his life is part of my life. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joshua, King David, King Solomon, that's part of who I am. I'm not just part of a chain. I'm not just a link in a chain. I am that chain. And that chain began so many years ago, and it's not ending with me. It's going on forever. I'm going to live forever because the Jewish people is eternal. And it's horizontal and it's vertical. In other words, it's all the Jews that ever lived, and that includes also all the Jews living today. They're all not just brothers and sisters of mine. We're all part of one mission, one nation, one identity. An identity that's always been connected, like I said, to a land, the land of Israel. When I say I'm a rabbi, briefly, I'm connected to the texts and the traditions of the Jewish people. I've been teaching Jewish texts for 30 years. When I say I'm a Zionist for me is a Jew who understands that at this juncture in human history, 20th century, 21st century, the time has come for the Jewish people to reconnect to the land of Israel. The time has come to consummate, to reconsummate our ancient connection to our ancient homeland. Because although we were born in the land, And for 1,000 years, the Jewish people lived in our land and had a state, a first and a second commonwealth in our land. For the past 2,000 years, we've been outside of our land. We've been wanderers. We've been in a diaspora. We've been in exile. We've been hoping. We've been praying. We've been looking forward to the day. We've been looking at the prophecies in the Bible that say that you will come back one day. And in this generation, we've come back. And for me, a Zionist is someone who feels that the time is ripe to come back. Historical connections have, historical situations, circumstances have made it time to come back, and we're back, and we are recreating the nation that was once there and always meant to be. And when I say that I'm a settler, you've all heard that term in the newspapers, the media, and for many of you, I assume it's a kind of a bad word. Is that true? Here you're looking at one. A settler is someone who lives geographically in the West Bank. You have the map over there, right, between, can you notice the area above and below Jerusalem on the right side, between the Jordan River and the line you have over there? That's the West Bank. A settler is someone, a Jew, an Israeli, who lives in the West Bank. But that's not the way I define it. A settler is someone who lives in Judah and Samaria. That's what we call it. Excuse me. 3,000 years ago, the area north of Jerusalem was called Samaria by Jews. The area south of Jerusalem was called Judah. A settler is someone who, being part of the return of the Jewish people to our land in this generation, 20th and 21st centuries, a settler is a Zionist who wants to come back to the biblical heartland, come back to where the Jewish people was born, to come back to where Jewish history always was beating. The beating heart was there because, although it's true that the coastline there, Haifa and Tel Aviv and Ashdod on the Mediterranean, they're part of the ancient land of Israel. They're part of the land that God promised to us, but that's not where Jews lived primarily throughout Jewish history. We lived north and south of Jerusalem. We lived in what's called today the West Bank, what Jews have always called Judah and Samaria. And if I'm in this generation coming back to the land of Israel to reconsummate our ancient homeland and to build the Jewish sovereign state for the third time, I want to do it where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked. I want to do it where King Solomon and King David had their kingdom. I want to be where the miracle of Hanukkah happened. I want to be where the Bar Kokhba rebellion took place 2,000 years ago. I want to be in the center of Jewish history. So in 1967, when Israel conquered the West Bank, what happened from my perspective is that the gate was opened for Jews to come back and walk in the footsteps of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to live right where Abraham is buried, in the city of Hebron, to be where King David had his capital, in the old city of Jerusalem. For me, living my life where I live in Judea, right south of Jerusalem, that's the greatest possible fulfillment and culmination of Jewish history and Jewish meaning and Jewish identity. I walk the roads of my town Alon Shvut, my settlement of Alon Shvut, and I'm walking where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived. I'm walking where the Bible happened. And there can be nothing more powerful and more significant than that. I thank God that I am alive in this generation. I was able to come back to the land that my forefathers in the Middle Ages only hoped and prayed for, but never managed to see and walk in. And I believe that the truth and the power and the righteousness of that story I just told you, that narrative, that identity, I believe that the truth and the power and the righteousness of that narrative have blinded me for most of my life to another truth, to another people. For all my life, I've lived 34 years where I live, in Judea, in Judah. And I never saw the Palestinians. They were invisible to me. I never took them into account. It's as if they didn't exist. I walked right by them, and they weren't there. And I understand, and this is something I only came to understand a year and a half ago. I understand that at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when the Zionist pioneers started streaming into the land of Israel to rebuild our ancient homeland, they thought they were entering an empty land, and they weren't. There was someone there before them, and they didn't see. Because of the necessity of what they were doing, because of the power of rebuilding a third Jewish commonwealth, because of the righteousness of recreating a Jewish homeland after 2,000 years of exile, they didn't see that there was another people there before them, another people who were being trampled. And in 1948, when 600,000 Jews in the land of Israel declared the state of Israel, and now we have our third Jewish commonwealth, we have Jewish independence, we have a Jewish homeland, we have a refuge for Jews around the world after the Holocaust, we didn't notice that our victory constituted a tragedy, a Nakba, for the Palestinian people. They weren't there, and we didn't see the Palestinian refugees streaming out of the cities that were becoming our Jewish cities. We didn't see the Palestinian diaspora that we were creating. We didn't see. And in 1967, when Israel reconquered the West Bank, Judah and Samaria, when the opportunity was created for me to go and live where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived and worked and cried and died, when an opportunity was created, we didn't notice that in repopulating Judah and Samaria, we were taking over, we were conquering, we were occupying over 1 million Palestinians who had been there for hundreds of years. We didn't see them. And for 34 years of my life, I didn't see them. And that began to change when I met Ali Abu Awwad. And I want to tell you the story. You know, Craig introduced us, and he said, you can notice who the rabbi is, and he probably meant me. For me, my rabbi is sitting over here, because he's opened my eyes up to a reality that without him didn't exist in my consciousness for most of my life. So I get an email from a Protestant pastor in Reston, Virginia, who said he had heard through the grapevine that I was interested in meeting Palestinians. And at that point, a year and a half ago, I'd never, ever, ever met a Palestinian. And he said that he comes to the Holy Land once or twice a year, meets Palestinians, meets Israelis, and introduces them one to the other. So we made a meeting. Pastor John Moyle came to my house. He heard my story, and he said, I want you to meet someone next week. He gave me a time, Thursday afternoon, and he told me where to go. And when the time came, I opened the front door of my house, and I told my wife where I was going, and she said, don't go. It's dangerous. And I went anyway. And I opened the front door. I walked 20 minutes through the Palestinian vineyards and fields and orchards that surround my house. I want to emphasize, I only had to walk by foot 20 minutes to meet the neighbor that until then didn't exist for me. And my heart was pounding as I walked through the fields because it's dangerous. And I was going to a Palestinian farm. And I got there, and I saw the strangest thing. I saw something that cannot happen where we live. I saw 20, 25 Israelis, 20, 25 Palestinians in the same place. And they were talking to each other, and they were eating together. It was like a party. Strange things happen. And I walked up to this woman who was dressed in brown from head to toe. I could only see her face. And we started talking. She knew English, and I know English as well. And one of the first things that was exchanged between us, I don't remember who said it first, was, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And the reaction was, I can't believe I'm talking to you. But we kept talking. And then she called over her husband. I was introduced to him as Jamal from Beit Umar. Now I know Beit Umar is right next to the settlement I live in, Alon Shvut. But of course I'd never ever been in Beit Umar. I want to tell you what I knew about Beit Umar until that point. When 30 years ago we had infants in the home, and you know sometimes parents get angry at their kids, it happens. My wife would curse at the kids who were making too much noise or crying, and she would say, go to Beit Umar. Translation into English, go to hell. And now I was meeting someone from hell. And he was a human being. And I have to tell you, I don't know how I can get this across to you, I was taken aback that I was talking to someone from hell. And he looked like a human being, and he talked like a human being. And he gets out his smartphone to show me on Google Maps where he lives in Beit Umar. And for a split second, I couldn't believe that a Palestinian has a smartphone. And he gets onto Google Maps much faster than I can ever do, and he shows me where he lives. And it turns out that he and I are neighbors, geographically neighbors, with a fence separating our house from their house. And I remember years ago, when the winds were blowing in the right direction, we can hear Palestinians talking in their homes at night, from the other side of the moon, from hell. And now I'm talking to someone from there. And I can't believe it. And he calls over his son, Yazin, and I see that Yazin, 17-year-old high school student, is wearing a windbreaker that says on it, Seeds of Peace. It's a camp in Maine that brings Palestinian Israeli kids together during the summer to get to know each other. And I see a Palestinian from Beit Umar wearing a windbreaker that has the word peace on it. And it couldn't be. Palestinians are only terrorists. They only are interested in throwing rocks at us and doing worse. And this kid has the word peace emblazoned on his jacket, and he starts talking to me about the things he learned in the camp, about reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. I couldn't believe it. So Jamal says to me at a certain point, he says, Hanan, when my kids see someone with a big kippah like yours, a yarmulke, they start to cry. And I said to him, why do they start to cry? And he didn't understand why I was asking. So he said, well, because people with big kippot like yours, they have long beards. And he thought I'd understand, but I didn't get it. Then he said, well, people with long beards and kippot, they carry submachine guns and they shoot at our kids. And I had no idea what he was talking about until a light bulb went off in my mind, and I suddenly saw how he and his children see me. Because I look so different than him, and my kids look so different than his kids. And of course, we sometimes go out into fields, the Palestinian fields, to feel the earth of the land of Israel under our feet, to see the ancient artifacts that my ancestors left behind 2,000 years ago. And we walk in the fields with our students and our families and our wives and our children. Of course we carry submachine guns, of course. It's par for the course. We're afraid of the bloodthirsty Palestinians. And I suddenly realized how I look with my submachine gun to Jamal's little kids. And they're afraid of me. And then Jamal emphasized, Hanan, we're all afraid of you settlers. And I said to him, what are you talking about? You're not afraid of us, we're afraid of you. And we both realized that we live in fear. And I want to stop my story for a second, parenthetically, and tell you another story. I want to tell you a story about the fear. So we, Israelis and Palestinians, in the West Bank, / occupied territories, / Greater Israel, / Judah and Samaria, we live so close to each other, yet so far away. We live in different towns and cities, separate. We speak different languages. Kids go to different schools, different shopping centers, different municipalities. Those who pick up my garbage don't pick up their garbage. Different legal systems. I live under Israeli law. They live under military law, under occupation. Different media. The newspapers we read, television, radio, that's not what they have. They get different news than we get. We live in two totally different worlds. We see each other, but understand nothing. It's almost as if we don't see each other at all. And when you're so close to each other, but don't know anything about the other, no human contact, of course there's going to be distrust, prejudice, stereotypes, fear, resentment, and yes, hate. And yes, hate. That's the way we live. And it happened about 8 or 9 months ago, right by the gate of Alon Shvut, the settlement I live in. There's a clan, perhaps more than a clan, 8, 9 Palestinian houses. And right on the road, where the Palestinian houses are on one side and the gate of Alon Shvut is the other side, a Palestinian put up a sign that says in Hebrew, Mishtelet HaShalom, the peace nursery. selling potted plants and gardening implements. It was written in Hebrew. Obviously, he wanted to sell his wares to Israelis, to settlers. So I see the sign on the road for a few weeks, and then at home we needed a potted plant. My wife and I knew what we wanted. I said to my wife, why don't you go to Mishtelet Shalom to get this plant we need? And a funny thing happened. She did what I suggested. And it's not just that she's my wife. I was surprised she did what I suggested, but my wife, like most, 95% of settlers, would never be caught dead in a Palestinian establishment. But for some reason, she forgot herself and she went. She got in the car, 2-minute drive to the gate of Alon Shvut. She parked the car, got out of the car, and when she came back, half an hour later, she told me the following story. She said at the entrance to the place was a Palestinian youth who tried to help her, but he didn't know Hebrew so well. It was flustering for my wife and for him. And then the owner came over. He spoke Hebrew better, and my wife told him what she wanted. And he said, yeah. And my wife told me that he took me deep into the nursery. And the two of us went together, alone, into the hothouse. And at the very end of the hothouse, he showed me a certain plant that found favor in my eyes. And we walked out of the hothouse together with the plant. And on the way to the cash register, we passed a group of Palestinians, 3 or 4, eating and smoking and speaking Arabic. And then I got to the cash register, my wife said I paid, took the plant in the car, got home, here it is, and I'd never ever go back there again. It was the most frightening experience in my life. I barely got out of there by the skin of my teeth. And you're laughing and I was crying. I had no idea what to say to my wife because I knew that fear is irrational. And I wanted to say, Ayala. It was convenient. It was cheap. You got exactly what you wanted. It was so simple. But from my wife's perspective, she did something stupid. She risked her life and almost paid with her life. She was traumatized. That's the way we live. And here I am at this get-together on Ali's land, and I'm meeting Palestinians, and my stereotypes are breaking down right then and there. And then after we got together, after we spoke in little groups and ate and chatted together, those people who were left, 15 on each side approximately, we sat in a circle as the sun was going down. One of the Israelis spoke about who he is and why we settlers live here, and then Ali spoke. And you're about to hear Ali speak. I'd never ever in my life heard a Palestinian give a talk. He spoke about his life. He spoke without rancor, without hate. He described what it's like to live in Beit Umar under Israeli occupation. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't know anything about occupation. All I knew that I was a Jew who had come back to the ancient homeland after 2,000 years. I was fulfilling God's will, and I am. And suddenly I hear that while I'm fulfilling God's will, someone else is suffering because of it. He spoke of occupation, he spoke of lack of rights, he spoke of going to jail, he spoke of being tortured. And it was really, really challenging to hear him speak, and it was really, really offensive. But I didn't hear him say anything that was false. He was taking the building blocks of history that I know. The return of the Jews to the land in 1947 and 48, 1967. But he's taking these building blocks of history and weaving them into a narrative so different than the narrative I know. I didn't know what to do with myself. And I walked out of there really confused and really perplexed. And I went home. One of the first things I did the next day is I started going on the internet to look what's going on here. And I read all these leftist websites that a rightist like me should never be caught dead reading. And I look at this stuff and it talks about the terrible things that the settlers are doing. And I felt that there's some truth in it. Because I've seen all the things that I was doing for 34 years. I saw but didn't see. It didn't penetrate me. But now all the pieces started falling into place. This guy Ali was not lying when he told me about the life of persecution he's experiencing. And I'd been in the army. I'd arrested Palestinians. I had been in a Jeep at 1 in the morning and broken into Palestinian houses and taken kids in their underwear, 14 and 15-year-old, into jail. I've done that, but I'd repressed it all. And now it's coming back to me. So I was really, really challenged, confused. And in the weeks and months after I first met Ali and started reading these websites, I would go back to Ali and talk to him again, and I would read more and I'd talk to people. And there were times in which I felt that my stomach was falling out. I had to pick it up from the ground. My kishkas were getting rearranged. My narrative was being completely confused. I was perplexed, and I didn't know I was in a spiritual crisis. And then I began to put it all together. And I began to come to an understanding that my truth, as true as it is and as powerful it is, my Zionist narrative, my fulfillment of biblical prophecy is all true, but it's also only partial. There's another truth out there. The Palestinian people are alive and well as individuals and as a collective, and I'd ignored them for all those years, and now I'm seeing them. And I have to find a way to build a complex self-understanding that includes my truth and also includes their truth at the same time. And I become a different person. You're looking now at a work in progress. You're looking at a very confused man, but also a very, very fulfilled man, because from a religious perspective, I believe that there's such a thing as truth. And I believe there's such a thing as falsehood. And for me, falsehood is partial truth masquerading as full truth. And it looks like for all those years I had truth, but it was a partial truth that thought that it was bigger than it was. And now my truth is being supplemented by Ali's truth. My Jewish truth is being supplemented by Palestinian truth. Thank you.
Good evening. Before I start think, I want to Greg, where is he? You are a hero. I just wanted to tell you that. And thank you for what you are doing for humanity. You know, for the last 13, 14 years, I was going all over to tell this story and to share people. And I'm not here to represent victimhood. I'm not here to talk about rightness. I'm not here to act or to say anything about punishment and blame. Because I know very well that we are the consequences of this game. We are broken enough to wake up and say, it's the time to fix things, not to add more fire to the fire. And wherever I go, I see people take sides, whether you are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. And people just create conflict, that we are the victims of this bro has to come over and tell people not to take sides, but to be pro-solution. And it happens everywhere, especially with politicians. When I spoke to the House of Lords, when I spoke to the United Nations, I saw the bro and the pro, the two camps, where I said, please, if you are not part of the problem, try to be part of the solution. But if you cannot be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem. We will deal with it. And we are not ready anymore to keep paying the price of international political investment in our blood. This considered to be the Holy Land, am I right? But this holiness doesn't come just from holy books. It should come from respecting the people who live on that land and in that land. And I have to tell you that I grow up believing in the opposite of what I just told you. I couldn't imagine one day that I will be standing next to a settler talking about any hope. But sometimes we don't reach solutions in life because we don't believe that we can do them. We can do that. And it's all about us. It's not about others. Because solution doesn't come from outside. It starts from us. Because we are the problem, not the other. It's so hard to say the truth. But without saying the truth, we will never reach solution. And I grow up in an environment that just teach me to hate. I was born to a refugee family, to a Palestinian refugee family. And I was born to a very political family, especially from my mother's side. My mother has become one of the most activists in Fatah movement. And she was to prison for several times. And I have seen her getting humiliated in front of my eyes many times. That no one needs to teach you how to hate if you encounter this, if you see this. Sometimes people ask me why Palestinians educate their kids to hate. Well, hey guys, do you need any specific curriculum for hatred? If you see your mother getting humiliated in front of your eyes, if there is these soldiers who prevent you to reach your school, asking for normal childhood condition to grow up normally. And then when the first Intifada started, it didn't take me a minute to participate and to become a Fatah activist and a Fatah fighter. I was trained on Kalashnikov, which was when I was 15 years old. And it was heavier than me, than my body. But I was not able to kill anyone. The best success is to manage that anger, which eats you. It's not easy. But I was not Mandela, by the way. And I was angry enough to do crazy things. Because every single move in my life was controlled by the occupier. Every dream in my mind was forbidden. Every single normal act that I wanted to take for my life to grow up normally was forbidden. Then I was arrested, and I spent 4 years in the Israeli prison with my mother, where she spent 5 years. And actually going to prison was like going to the best university that you can imagine. Because Palestinian political prisoners have succeeded to keep their morality by building a system for themselves, creating 5 committees: education, management, national, security and negotiation committee, and create this structure which builds you to be a better person. So I have learned languages, and I have learned about many national experience and cultures and politics. But the best thing that I have learned is about the human being inside me. When me and my mother participated in a hunger strike for 17 days to meet each other, from prison to prison. That was the journey. This is what we call it, where we succeed to achieve something for the first time in our life from Israel, after struggling and starving for 17 days. And I think that event has changed my life, because for the first time, I could see the power of my humanity, not the rightness of the fighter inside me. I could secure my enemy to give up, to create a secure place for them, to see me as a human being, to admit to my rights. But I could be right not by having this political argument of being a victim. But I was right because my way and my approach was moral enough to be right, without harming anyone, without attacking anyone. And I was not giving my right. I was not giving up my right. And I think I was the best fighter for my right by acting non-violently. And I was not happy. I was angry. And that's why I say that it's okay to be angry and act non-violently. Non-violent will not erase the anger. The pain will not disappear. But non-violence is the manager of that anger. Instead of that anger will victimize us, we will refuse to be victims of the crime. And when we act non-violently, we celebrate our existence. We can smile again between the tears. We can do it. So that event has changed all of my mind. Then I was released and I became a Palestinian security officer after the signing of Oslo Peace Agreement, creating the Palestinian Authority on the ground. And we wanted to build our constitution and to become a state. We wanted to become citizen of a Palestinian state for the first time. We wanted to consider violence as an illegal action because there is no legitimacy to violence anymore. But we couldn't do that for many reasons. I'm not going to go there for this analyzing, but enough to say that people have lost their hope and people has become broken and hopeless for any peace initiative or any peace approach because that was not building peace. The peace agreement has become just piece of paper. There was no engagement of two nations. There was no attention to pay attention to people's roots to both lands. And there was a political recognition which has become fake because we couldn't recognize the right of each other to exist normally and to serve our belonging to the land. So the whole thing collapsed. In 2000, I was badly wounded by a settler in my knee, and I was sent to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment, where I received the news that my older brother Yusuf has been stopped by a group of Israeli soldiers and very violently killed. He was 31 years old, and he was a father of 2 kids, and he left them, and this huge package of pain and loss and anger that when he died, he took the taste of my life with him. That was the minute that I didn't want to live anymore. He was my best friend. And then you ask yourself, for what? What could worth such a price? Land, ideology, identity? I mean, the holy thing in life is our life itself. Human being life. How come that there is a human being is able to take a life of another innocent person, taking him from his kids, shooting him 70 centimeters away from his head, and taking his life for what? Under what rightness can human being do this to each other? I become more angry. I was prepared and trained on Kalashnikov and I was prepared. I was enough angry to take revenge. And the first thing that you think about when this happened to you is punishment. You want to punish, and you want to create a big punishment to the one who victimized you. But that event in the prison, of that hunger strike, has raised a conflict inside my mind. As a politician, as a fighter even. When I said, if it's about revenge, I have to create a mess, a big revenge. So what could be the number of Israelis that I have to kill to make this punishment effective? How many Israeli mothers has to cry for my mother's tears to disappear? And how many Israeli broken hearts has to be broken to fix my heart and to heal this pain, or to bring back my brother, maybe. And then you think and you think and you think, and you realize that there is no revenge. Whatever I will do, he will not come back. Whatever I will do, my life will not become easier. But how can I open my eyes? How can I be able to see soldiers? I live with them. And how can I be able to breathe again? For what reason? Then I was stuck in this conflict. Until one day, after 1 year, a huge transformation has happened to me by meeting a group of Israeli bereaved families where my mother received them. And that was shocking to me, that my mother, which considered as a hero in the West Bank, received a group, inviting a group of bereaved Israeli families who have lost a member of their family coming to my home. But that was shocking to me, that an Israeli pick up a phone to call us to say that they are coming to visit us, This doesn't exist. I always have Israelis in my home, always. But they never pick up a phone and call us. And that was shocking to me, to see an Israeli crying for the first time in my life. Even to see an Israeli as a victim. I couldn't imagine that Jewish people have tears. I couldn't imagine regarding what they do to us. Judaism for me was a checkpoint. That's it. Israel for me was the bullet which has killed my brother. That's Israel. Nothing more. And finally, you see a victim, and you realize that you are not the only victim. Then you realize that there is a partner. Because if these people can come to my home to recognize my right and to build a future with me together, so everyone can. So my complicated journey started in 2002. And I will tell you that my life has not become easy. It's become very complicated. I start acting non-violently, building programs, leading movements. And recently, I arrived to a piece of land belonging to my family, surrounded with 6 settlements around me, and tried to build or to create. Building is forbidden by the Israeli army law. To create a Palestinian non-violent center. And many friends of mine told me that I have lost my mind, because they are not gonna allow me to do anything there. The area is so sensitive. Then I found out myself speaking to settlers, even building programs and projects with settlers. Then I realized that I was acting just with the convinced people. But the problem is not from the convinced people or with the convinced people. The problem with the people who disagree with us. So if there is any act or work has to be done, it should be done with the people who disagree with us, if we are real leaders. But you know, I used to go to 5-star hotel peace conferences, the 5-star peace. I used to go to these nice peace Tel Aviv cafes. And I used to go with nice left-wing Israelis to these nice events for peace where we eat hummus and hug each other. And I think when Israelis tell me always that they are good, they don't speak to settlers, I think the peace movement in Israel is not courageous enough to touch the heart of the problem. Because the heart of the problem is in the West Bank. We suffer from extremist settler. We don't suffer from lefties in Tel Aviv. And the real and the courage is to create change on the West Bank. And I know many Palestinians will be upset with that. Will say, how can you speak to settlers? Because people are afraid from normalization, giving legitimacy to settlement. Then I realize that the answer should be, if the political argument about one state or two states regarding the political debate today, it's impossible. One state is impossible, and I don't want to explain why, but at least Jewish people want to be a majority in one land. They will refuse anything will lead for one-state solution, at least for now. And two-state solution has become impossible. Why? Because the roots of two nations. The Palestinian belonging is mostly to Jaffa and Haifa and Nazareth and all of these areas. The Jewish roots in Palestine is in the West Bank, not in Tel Aviv. Hanan always said, Judaism was born in the West Bank, not in Tel Aviv. So how do you create a political design which will prevent people from their belonging to the land and expect any solution? And I know it's complex, but I know very well that it's not impossible. Because if two people will decide to design a political management to serve their ideology and their identity and their roots to the land, the political design will not be impossible. But sometimes what prevents us from peace, that we still accept the price of war than the price of peace. When the price of peace will become cheaper than the price of war, we will have peace. And for sure, this needs courage. Sometimes this needs madness. You have to be crazy to deal with the madness. And sometimes this needs openness. Always need openness. To be able to see the other side, the truth, even if you disagree with it. Just to consider that this truth is true. Whatever I think about it, it is true. But I will create a place where two truths has to fit normally. Because if one of these truths will not exist, no one will live in peace, and the future is gonna be hell for both nations. And that's why we are here. And that's why I feel that every human being on this planet has a duty. If you consider that land as a holy land for all religion, so it's your duty to stand by us together, to raise our voice that our blood is not for sale anymore. Thank you.